Hey everyone, Phoebe Rizzo. Welcome to the new year, and like I said last time, beginning a kind of a rundown of some of my favorites this month, and kick things off. Start with The Final Girls. 2015 horror comedy that's pretty much a send up to 80s slashers in general, and it's a lot of fun. Now, I will state that there's actually two movies in 2015 with very similar titles. There's Final Girl and The Final Girls. And actually, both of them even share a similar actor. I think it was Alexander Ludwig that's in both of them. So makes it a little tricky to track down the exact correct film at this point. But well, especially since this one's not the easiest movie to come by in certain terms. It, while released theatrically, it didn't really take off, and it's kind of become more of a cult hit in later times. And streaming services only 50-50 have it on, so. But if you do get a chance, I do highly recommend tracking this one down. So, the plot of The Final Girls is, well, fairly ridiculous, but it's kind of a nonsensical nature that movies seem to have lost in recent years, which I think almost harkens back to the 80s kind of style that it's going for, where not everything has to have a long winded explanation, where something weird can just happen and you just go with it. So, in this movie, a young girl, Max, and her mother, well, get into a car accident very early on. Now, Max's mother is a actress who is most famous for her horror film Camp Bloodbath, and since then she's been typecast and has been having trouble getting roles. Now, after her mother's death in the car accident, it's not really a spoiler. It happens in the first 5 minutes of the movie, so that's kind of the general setup. Her and her friends, 3 years later, on the anniversary of her mother's death, are going to essentially a film festival tribute where it's showing Camp Bloodbath 1 and 2. Then, so you pretty much have like a stereotypical horror group of the main girl, the jock boyfriend, the mean girl, then her nerdy best friend, and the actually I wouldn't call her the nerdy best friend exactly, the sassy best friend I suppose, and then the her movie enthusiast friend. Now the movie from there gets a little begins with its tongue-in-cheek atmosphere as a fire breaks out in the movie theater. They try, while trying to flee the blaze, cut a hole in the movie screen, go in, and suddenly they're in the movie and now have to survive Camp Bloodbath. So, like I said, it's the plot is ridiculous, but it doesn't take itself seriously, and it never meant to. The then and like I said, it's kind of a love letter to the 80s genre where strange or fantastic things would just happen and you didn't really need the explanation. You could just go with it. And movies these days seem to have kind of lost that in a way. And I think that's a bit of a disappointment where you could just say, okay, movie, go with it. So they begin having to interact with this horror movie world that they find themselves in and realize that the movie is pretty much playing out as scripted, but the more they try to interact with it, the more things keep veering off course, and now they end up putting themselves in the sights of the masked killer, Billy Murphy. And it lovingly points out a lot of the cliches and tropes and has fun with them, and either by playing them up incredibly or subverting them in entertaining ways. Like their initial plan to survive the film involves with them trying to stay close to the final girl, who they know makes it to the end. Only because of their actions therein, they cause the final girl's death very quickly. So now they're kind of on their own and have to come up with a new plan. It's a very funny movie with its as it points out all the problems and flaws in a lot of horror films and has a good time with them. It's hard to go into too many details there without kind of going away some of the punchlines, but I will say this film's strongest point almost makes it a decent Mother's Day film, as the main girl Max, she's going through a special kind of. She is having a hard time with this because her mother's character is now right in front of her, and having been dead for 3 years, it's her first time seeing her since then, and now is knowing that her mother's going to die in front of her, is doing everything she can to help her mother get to the end credits, and if she can, maybe even escape the movie. So it gets a little surreal there, and it actually has a lot of heart for kind of a more tongue-in-cheek comedy. So I do recommend seeing it just for that relationship play out as alone, let alone the great humor. The movie is most directly a parody of Friday the 13th, though it definitely has references to a lot of other classics like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, particularly Halloween 2, and The Burning. So it kind of pokes and references a lot of them heavily, and you can kind of see what they're pulling from for a lot of times. Particularly like when the killer shows up whenever someone is having sex or getting naked, and they use that to try to lure him in when they enact Operation Booby Trap. But that said, most of the characters in the movie are slasher movie characters, so their dialogue is amazingly bad, intentionally so, and they're not the brightest characters as they're forced to try to help these guys who are determined not to survive the movie almost. So it's a lot of fun in that regard. Now, the movie is only PG-13, and I believe it was cut down from an R rating, but the director himself has now said that he's pleased with the final product, and the gore itself really, while very minimal, isn't really needed to make this film as enjoyable as it is. I will say it does have its flaws. The car crash at the beginning is CG and very noticeably so, but that's pretty forgivable, and most of the other effects are fine. I mean, there's nothing really standout-ish in that regard, but it has a good time with itself, and that's the important thing. And the characters, they're a good friend group, and they really mesh very well together, and the way they play off each other is quite entertaining, particularly Adam Devine, and Todd and Miss Middleditch's characters. They really kind of just let their dialogue flow, and it doesn't seem like they're doing unnecessary ad-libbing, but it makes the conversation seem more natural. Let's see, I think that touches on most of the cast. The killer himself is pretty much almost a stand-in for Jason Voorhees. Then his name, as I said before, is Billy Murphy, and essentially he's a kid who was pranked back years before and with firecrackers and got burns on 80% of his body, so almost a blend of Freddy and Jason there. And he's got kind of this weird tiki mask that he carved for himself and now is a hulking, machete-wielding maniac. But most of the scenes more directly parody Friday the 13th. One bit of trivia that kind of I found interesting was one of the co-writers actually was inspired by some of his actual events with his own father. So his father was a part of The Exorcist, Father Carrick's character, I believe. And pretty much the writer here was pretty much, it helped him to cope with his own father's death, kind of mirroring Max's own struggles with her mother and seeing her in movies, particularly movies where she dies. So the movie has a lot of heart, but a very good sense of humor, and I don't think it gets nearly enough attention, so I do recommend checking it out if you get a chance. And remember, that's The Final Girls, not Final Girl. Now, I don't know how good of a film Final Girl is. I've never seen it, and maybe will at some point, but for the recommendation, I'm giving this one 5 MacGuffins because it's a lot of fun, and any flaws in it are easy to overlook. It's just a fun ride. Alright, that's all for today, and I'll probably see you back in a couple days. I might be doing a few more videos than average this month as I try to get in as many favorites as I can, because I watch a lot of movies, and I've got a lot of movies that I've been meaning to rewatch. So, you'll be seeing a lot of me. Take care, everybody.